Yes, sir. Tried.
So could you get was there any difficulty?
সে মানে করেছিলাম, উত্তরটা আবার কি হবে জানি না।
মানে পুরোটা করেছো তাই তো?
হ্যাঁ।
বাহ, তুমি একা করেছো না বাকিরাও করেছি?
স্যার আমিও করেছিলাম।
ঠিক আছে, আর কেউ? যাই হোক, মানে কেউ করেছে কেউ করেনি, এরকম তো হতেই পারে। তো এই ধরনের প্রবলেম এক্সামিনেশনে থাকবে। ইনফ্যাক্ট নেক্সট আমি একটা ক্লাস টেস্ট নেব, সেটাও আমি বলে দিচ্ছি। ডেট আই উইল ডিসকাস উইথ ইউ দ্যাট হুইচ ডেট ইজ কনভিনিয়েন্ট। I will take a class test. Now I will give you a presentation. This presentation has been prepared by one very senior person, Mr. Saxena. I like অথবা আখের যে ড্রাইড আপ হয়ে গেল যে ছিলকাগুলো থাকে, সো দ্য residue of sugarcane, which we call bagasse, if those are burned, they can also produce heat, and although they produce some amount of carbon dioxide, but these are renewable, so we do not consider them as a green, as a fossil fuel. So we keep this biological system apart and consider them as green energy. Particularly since a tree develops good amount of oxygen and absorbs carbon dioxide, so energy from tree residue, that is plant residue, is also termed as green energy. Now in this experimentation we have tried to identify how much green energy can be injected in Indian power sector, because one thing you must keep in your mind, that you need to run a power system where the power supply has to be 24/7. You cannot have the luxury of interrupting the power. You cannot have. So you should have a stable system of supply. Now, if you find that you are left with a system where there are interruption, there are variability, then you are not in a position to supply power with those resources unless you get them corrected. What do I mean that to get it corrected? Because you should suppose you are giving electricity from wind power plant. Try to understand. You are giving electricity from a wind power plant. Now, if you have two wind power plants which are located at the same position, and you know that wind speed is a gift of the nature, you cannot control the wind speed at your sweet will, because you cannot make wind to blow by running fans. This is an absurd theory. You can use a fan in your house to cool yourself, and so long there is electricity, the fan will move. But when you are producing wind fan to generate electricity, you have to leave it to the nature. And all we know that wind speed, natural wind speed, is variable. Sometimes it blows at high speed, sometimes it becomes low. So uh, when the wind speed is less, obviously the fan movement also slows down, the fan blades runs at a lower rpm, and when the wind speed is more, the rpm increases. Proportionately, the electricity generation also increases. I also, when I teach energy conversion, I detail on such conversion possibilities, that how wind energy converts, wind generator converts wind energy to electricity. However, let us not discuss all those details here. Let us understand that when wind blows, wind generator produces electricity, and the quantum of electricity generation is proportional to the wind speed, because it transfers more energy to the wind blades when the speed of wind is high. You can simply calculate, considering the area, considering v as wind speed, and how much momentum the wind is thrust is giving on the wind blades, and it starts rotating. So the quantum of thrust gets converted to the energy, and the energy gets converted to electricity and electrical energy. So simple. Now it is well understood that if you run wind turbine, it will also generate electricity, but it may be variable in nature. Sometimes the speed is high, so electricity is high, generation quantum is high, and sometimes it is low, generation quantum is low. But you are giving supply to your consumers. So you cannot give some consumer power at some time, and interrupt some consumers at some time. So they will not allow that, and it is not a business. The consumers, when they make a contract to you for getting electricity, they expect it to get it for 24/7. Now, how this can be avoided? If you have a bank of wind generators which are located at different locations in the geographical plane, they suppose one wind is distant around 10-15 kilometers from the other, located in the mountain peak, maybe low height mountains, but at the high level of mountain where the wind speed is high. So if some location, if you find the wind speed is low, maybe in the other location the wind speed is high. So on an average, if you get the entire generators connected together, you may get a better result because of averaging out. That is a solution, but that is not a foolproof solution. Because when the average wind speed becomes low at a certain area, it is not expected that you can get more wind. So as a whole, the capacity utilization factor, that is CUF, of a wind power plant is something around 20%. Suppose you have got a 20 megawatt wind turbines, say 2 megawatt each, all 10 wind mega generators are connected here and there, fixed here and there, and all are connected. You can expect that throughout the day it has generated only 20% of 20 megawatt, that is around 4 megawatt. So this is the output. Now, based on such output, is it possible for you to give supply to a consumer or to a group of consumers where thousands of people are expecting to get electricity throughout day and night, particularly in this scorching summer? You cannot allow to interrupt. So what you need to have, you must depend on some other renewable, some other resource which is having a very stable type, stable characteristics of generation. And that is possible only in thermal generation, because when you have brought coal, which is the primary source of generation, and put it in your feedstock, and if you allow the coal to move on, then you can generate whatever you decide. But this is not our desire. We do not like to run every we do not agree to give entire electricity through coal generated power, because this is not good for the society, this is not good for sustainability. So we will allow coal to the extent possible, as low as possible, and try to give more support from renewable resources like wind, like solar. And again, solar, you know very well that solar generation is only available in day period. So generation of solar is restricted to day period only. And again, it takes more or less the figure of a sine curve, that it starts rising when the solar insolence is low. The generation is also low. When the solar insolence is high at the day peak period, like 12 to 1, then the generation is maximum. Again, it starts again it starts lowering down, and the generation gradually reduces and becomes very low on the onset of evening. So day period, you get on an average, suppose you are having a thermal plant of say 10 megawatt peak. At peak period it can develop 10 megawatt, but on an average throughout the day you can get only around again 20, 21, 22% of the entire energy what it has produced. So the variability is very much existent in solar even, and possibility of interruptibility is also there, because if cloud comes you don't get solar generation, as like if wind flow stops, you don't get wind generation. So you have to take care of those problems, and therefore you need to bank upon some other very stable source of supply like thermal or like hydro. Hydro, you can control the penstock, you can control in a reservoir if you store water and allow the water to flow through penstocks. And if you can control the valve, you can control the speed of the machine and the generator and the generated power. So we can consider there are two very stable resources, hydro and coal, and obviously another very stable resources which is again can be considered as a green power, but we take it with a pinch of salt because there are many incidents of major disturbance with nuclear power. But we may be a little bit skeptic in foreign countries like in France, in Germany, in USA. There are many a number of nuclear power plants. In India, numbers are very less, but in future, if we can also go more with nuclear power plants. So it is clear that we need to inject the renewables with the existing and traditional thermal generation with the objective of reducing thermal generation to the extent possible. But there are some parameters that at what extent we will reduce these plants, will reduce generation of the plants, and how we run these plants. Because in day period, when solar is available, suppose we are increasing suppose we are having a very high amount of solar energy. Now the solar energy intends to be uh, injected in the grid. The grid has a requirement. Take the case of simplicity. Suppose the grid has a requirement of 200 megawatt in day period, right? Earlier, if we just understand that out of this 200 megawatt, say 200 gigawatts, let's say 200 gigawatt, out of this 200 gigawatt, suppose 150 gigawatt was fed by thermal, another 20 gigawatt was fed by how much? Hydro. So 150 plus 50, 20, that is 170, and another 30 gigawatt was being fed by solar or something, renewable wind, and all together another 30. Now we are having a large number of solars in our hand, and we are thinking that we will increase the solar generation because we want to green the grid. In the day period, obviously, if you have 100 gigawatt solar, so you can definitely try to add 100 gigawatt at the peak period. Now what will happen? To accommodate that solar generation in the grid, because you cannot add power beyond the requirement of the grid. So long the grid had no requirement, it was being filled up, or it was running with 150 gigawatt of thermal, with 20 gigawatt of solar, with 20 gigawatt of hydro, with 30 gigawatt of wind plus solar plus biomass, etc. Renewable. Now, when we are trying to increase or add up another 70 gigawatt of solar or 100 gigawatt of solar, because we have that installed that much solar in our system, you need to reduce the thermal generation, and your objective is that I will reduce thermal generation to the extent possible. Then what will happen? That 150 solar thermal generation earlier it will be reduced by another 100 gigawatt as you are trying to add 100 gigawatt. So during daytime, you are left with only 50 gigawatt of thermal. and that too at the day lean period. So what has happened throughout the onset, throughout the rising of sun's insolence, solar insolence, you are gradually increasing the solar power and have made a peak, at 12 noon to 1. And you have stressed the thermal units to reduce generation from 150 gigawatt to 50 gigawatt only. Please keep in mind that thermal generations do have a limit of operation that we call minimum technical limit, which is around 40 to 45% of its full capacity. Now, if the generator was doing 150 megawatt, obviously there was some space was kept behind, because in the day period, obviously every machine is not doing its full capacity. So let us assume the machines were at their 90% rating. Now you reduce all the machines to 50%, then 150 would have tried to become, say, 70 to 75. At the max, you can reduce it. If you run, if you want to run all the machines together. But our objective intention is to reduce further. So there is a possibility of tripping out of machine. Now, one question may rise in your mind that why instead of shutting, we can shut down some of the machines? Then the question will not arise. If we shut down, definitely we can save more coal. But problem is that when the solar energy will not be there, because after 1 p.m. or after 1:30 p.m., the solar insolence will gradually go down, and more thermal generation will again be required to run the grid. So we have been restricted to utilize solar to a limit, not to the full quantum what we are having in our head. So could you understand the problem? Gopal,
Yes, sir.
আমার কথা শুনতে পেয়েছো, বুঝতে পেরেছো?
Yes, sir.
Was it clear?
Yes, sir.
Fine. Now, in the process, the first page, what I am telling, I have given you the entire picture of the issues on greening the grid, or not all the issues, one of the issues, and how we have done. That is given in this presentation. Temporal detail, hourly simulation for all 8760 hours. Why 8760? 24 into 30 or 24 into 365. It gives you 8760. That means in a year you get 8760 hours, capturing daily and seasonal variability of demand and supply. 15-minute resolution of some part of this year to capture ramping constant. What is ramping constant? Ramping constant is that when the peak load comes, per minute, the load go on rising. Load go on rising means that it expects the generation should also be in line with that. Otherwise, there will be load and generation imbalance. Suppose the load is 100 megawatt and generation is 80 megawatt, then obviously you are unable to match the load. So what will happen? The system will not be able to sustain, the system will trip. So we need to have every 15 minutes data interpretation, data input, which shows that what is the per minute rise of rate of in demand, and whether my system is capable of meeting that demand. And the spatial detail is that each state represented individually with unique demand and supply profiles. Suppose we are taking the picture of India. Now, if you see the picture of India, that what is the total demand and what is the per hourly growth rate or per minute growth rate, you will get a picture. Now, if you see the same thing, per hourly demand rise divided by, if you take the picture of a particular state, say West Bengal, and if you take a snapshot of demand rise against time, that is demand rise per minute, that of West Bengal will surely not match that of Maharashtra. Will then the demand profile of Maharashtra, that is demand rise per minute, will not at all match with that of say Jammu and Kashmir. But all are integral part of India. So when they are taken together, that takes a profile, demand profile of entire India, and when they are taken separately, state-wise, it takes a different picture. Now, generation framework, scenario framework, generation capabilities, baseline capacity scenarios, 26% variable renewable energy in total generation, high renewable energy scenarios, 32% variable renewable energy in total generation. So, দুটো কেস করা হয়েছে, একটা হচ্ছে 26% VRE আর একটা 32% VRE. এর বেশি যদি VRE আমরা নিয়ে থাকি, if we take a 40% VRE, then because of fluctuations of the variability against the steady generation, there will be gross imbalance in power transmission, distribution, and supply system. Third is power system flexibility, degree of thermal flexibility. আমি তোমাদের একটু আগে বলেছি যে থার্মাল জেনারেশনকে আমি নামাতে পারি, বাড়াতে পারি over a certain limit, but not beyond that. Then the thermal generation will be unable to withstand that fluctuation. Transmission system and power transfer flexibility. Yes, we have a transmission system, and how much power transfer is possible through the transmission lines, there is a limit. So it is not uniformly flexible. Development of the transmission system, optimization of scheduling and dispatch across states. Because the solar generation is possible, wind generation is possible on those states where the solar insolence and wind power is more. Like tomra jano, they in Rajasthan, in Chennai, and in partly in Karnataka, Maharashtra, the power, the wind generation is very high. Similarly in Rajasthan, similarly in Chennai, and in Ladakh region, the solar insolence are reasonably high. So the quantum of solar and wind generation are more in those areas. However, in other part of countries, solar and renewables are possible, but not as good as of those, solar or wind prone areas. Therefore, some state has more wind, some state has more solar, so they try to inject in the grid their amount of solar, their amount of wind generation, and the power network, transmission network should have the capacity to evacuate that. Otherwise, there will be network constraints, there will be network bottleneck, congestion of electricity, and there will be difficulty in power flow. So these are also very, very important to consider. Flexibility needs will increase faster than electricity demand, driven by increased variable generation and changing consumption patterns. Flexibility needs 2017-2030. What is flexibility need? That is how I am supplying my generation against the load demand. Because I do not have much control on the load demand, because load demand is created by the consumers. Each and every consumer, you cannot predict when they will run their motor, when they will switch on their air conditioners, fans, or they will run their big machines. But you have, from the supply side, you have the control to run your generation. So your system has to be flexible to meet the customer demand. Estimated as 3% peak demand plus 5% peak renewable production as a proxy for forecast errors. So one scenario is considered reserve requirement, then maximum ramp rate of maximum 1 hour ramp in a year, that is 3 times increase korche, 3.5 times korche, 4.1 time korche. So these may be the ramp rate, whether I can withstand that ramp rate or not. That means what degree, how steeply the power demand is rising before the peak time. In our country, normally the peak time takes place in the evening. However, due to severe heat wave, the peak time has come down even at afternoon because of huge air conditioning load demands, mainly at city areas. Even then, if you consider overall, because of onset of evening, the light load comes, the illumination load comes, the fan load also come mainly in the evening for the rural India, and which is basically the dominating areas all over India. So the evening peak is the prime peak time, which takes place at around 17:30, 7 to 7:30 in the evening period. So that is the peak period. So time before peak says from 4 to 6:30. The demand which goes on increasing to meet the maximum demand is called the ramp rate. And to match the continuous rise in demand, the generation has to be capable enough to match with this ramp rate. Now, how this ramp rate is possible? Because you need to, in that time, what the situation is, your solar generation is drooping. In fact, at 6 p.m., there is virtually no solar generation. So you have to bank only on wind, which is again variable. And you have to depend on thermal generation, which is a time-taking generation, because you are putting more coal, you are allowing the coal to burn, you are allowing the steam to generate, you are allowing the steam to flow, respond to the boiler, and the entire entire thermal cycle, which is basically has a definite time lag because of mechanical operations, and the demand is not waiting for the mechanical operation to take place. So you need to have further support. And what are the supports? The support might be either hydro or some other thing. Maybe in the modern technology, the battery support. The grid support, if it comes from the battery, maybe at the low voltage level, maybe at the high voltage level, maybe at super high voltage level, depending on the volume of the battery. But the pros is battery can be a good support. Cons is the cost is very high, and the duration of life of a battery is not very high. So these are the problems. Now, daily balancing, average spread between maximum and minimum residual demand after this variable renewable energy. Seasonal balancing, residual energy requirement after VRE is highest versus lowest month. So these are the how much variable energy will be kept in my hand and what is the balancing energy required for these variables depending on various energy, various demand parameters. The conventional coal and hydro fleet have a crucial role to play. What I have been discussing throughout this. Now, 250, one scenario is taken that 250, 2050K that is 250 gigawatt power is maximum renewable generation per day. So this if you go through, I'll share this presentation with you. Total curtailment, solar, wind, biomass, sun, small hydro. So let us presume this black area this ash colored area that is at the bottom part of the curve, which is basically thermal, which is running at a base load, reducing its capacity, reducing its generation when the solar is being picked up. So this yellowish zone is indicating the solar generation, and the other parameters, the bluish zone is hydro. So during the reduction of solar, we are also controlling hydro because hydro control is much easier. Thermal control is little bit challenging. However, you need to do it to accommodate thermal generation. And in the evening, say by 18, when the solar generation drops to 0, then you need to increase thermal, you need to increase hydro, you need to increase all other resources what you have, presuming that wind and others on which you have very little control will remain on the hand of the nature. Now the aggregate annual power plant load factor of the coal fleet is 58 to 65%, but coal shifts from providing baseload to providing substantial flexibility by varying its output across the day and across the seasons. So long coal is being used as a base load station. That is, whatever be the generation of coal, whatever be the amount, the coal will go on doing the average, base power station. It will the other resources will come as a fluctuating load because they are less in quantum and costlier in their prices. But now the scenario, while greening the grid, the scenario has changed. The renewable power, which is solar and wind, has become cheaper. The solar unit has come down to less than 3 rupees, 2 rupees 32 paise. Once upon a time the solar unit has become, now it has again elevated, but definitely it has become much cheaper. Same with the wind. So therefore the cost parameter wise, even the renewables are low. Thermal is more costly. So the variability will come on the flexibility. It is not variability. The flexibility will come on thermal generation. Hydro, the cost is low, but hydro again have some limitations because we have got a limited number of rivers and we do not have enough hydro sources in our country, and you need to have rehabilitation issues on hydro generation, the environmental issues on hydro generation. So instead, we are thinking to grow, a large number of pump storages, so that the pump storage can help us in the system. So technically challenging to shifting of thermal machines required for some coal units unless other sources of flexibility are developed. Hydro provides an essential fast ramping resource for peaking and must be reserved for this purpose. So hydro is the best to act as a peaking generation. As I told you earlier, the battery storage and pumped hydro storage can provide multiple benefits and need to be developed at scale by 2030. So the same picture, I will share the presentation with you. You see that total curtailment of energy requirement is how much, and how much of them is being fed by uh, thermal stations, which is basically the fossil fuel power stations, and how much is being fed by renewable stations. You just go through the picture, you will understand. The power grid provides a crucial tool for facilitating higher shares of renewable energy than states could achieve on their own.
Sir,
Yes,
sir, BSS charge ওখানে একটা previous presentation ছিল স্লাইডটাতে
কোনটা বলো তো?
এখানে স্যার বিইএসএস চার্জ যেটা আছে একদম ডাউনওয়ার্ড আছে, ওটা স্যার কি ইন্ডিকেট করছে? মানে স্যার ব্যাটারি স্টোরেজ ইন হাই রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি সিনারিও পিকচারটাই ওখানে হচ্ছে যে একটা ডাউনওয়ার্ডে বিইএসএস চার্জ বলতে আছে।
বিইএসএস এইখানে যেটা দেখা যাচ্ছে টোটাল কার্টেলমেন্ট, আর পিঙ্ক লাইনে বিএসএস ডিসচার্জ। বিএসএস ডিসচার্জটা কোন টাইমে হচ্ছে? 18টা থেকে 22টা, দেখতে পাচ্ছ? ব্যাটারি এনার্জি স্টোরেজ সার্ভিসেস,
হ্যাঁ স্যার,
বিএসএস। এবার বিএসএস ডিসচার্জ মানে সন্ধ্যেবেলায় আমার ব্যাটারিগুলো এনার্জি স্টোরড হয়ে থাকে, সেখান থেকে আমি এনার্জি ডিসচার্জ করে আমার সিস্টেমে ঢোকাবো। তাহলে কোনো একটা সময় আমার ব্যাটারিটাকে তো চার্জ করে নিতে হবে, তাই তো? বুঝতে পারছো? এই যে তলায় কালো লাইনটা, আমার পয়েন্টারটা দেখতে পাচ্ছ? এই যে কালো লাইনটা বিলো দ্য রেড লাইন, যে কালো বটমের দিকে চলে গেছে, দ্যাট ইজ বিইএসএস, ব্যাটারি এনার্জি স্টোরেজ সার্ভিসেস এর চার্জিং টাইম। তখন তো ইট ইজ টেকিং পাওয়ার ফ্রম দ্য গ্রিড, রাইট? ব্যাটারি চার্জটা কি লোড, তো ইট ইজ টেকিং পাওয়ার ফ্রম দ্য গ্রিড। সো ইভিনিং এ, আফটার ইভিনিং, যখন আমি থার্মাল গুলোকে আর তুলতে চাইছি না, তখন কিছুটা ডিমান্ড আই এম ট্রাইং টু ফিড থ্রু ব্যাটারি। ক্লিয়ার?
ইয়েস আন্ডারস্টুড।
থ্যাংক ইউ ফর দ্য কোয়েরি। India's large and integrated grid provides a crucial tool for integrating large shares for renewable energy. এটা ভারতের বিশেষত্ব। ইন্ডিয়াতে একটা বিরাট বড় লার্জ ইন্টিগ্রেটেড গ্রিড আছে, তাতে তুমি এই রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জিটা বিভিন্ন পয়েন্ট দিয়ে ইনজেক্ট করতে পারো। যদি ছোট গ্রিড হতো তাহলে কিন্তু ইনজেকশন পয়েন্টগুলো অনেক কমে যেত। Interstate power flows are substantial and vary in direction and magnitude depending on the time of day and the season of the year. Managing these power flows require not just more infrastructure but also regulatory and market reforms to promote cross-border scheduling and dispatch of power. এটা এখন বোঝার দরকার নেই। Power system planning at state level needs to incorporate a regional perspective so that resource planning takes into account the regional perspective. পাওয়ার সিস্টেম প্ল্যানিংটা স্টেট লেভেলে এমন ভাবে করতে হয় যাতে ওই রিজিওনাল প্ল্যানিং এ কি কি মানে রিজিয়নে কি কি রিকোয়ারমেন্ট আছে সেইগুলো এবং রিসোর্স কি কি আছে, অর্থাৎ যেখানে উইন্ড আছে সেখানে উইন্ড বেশি ইনপুট করব, যেখানে কয়লা আছে সেখানে আমায় চিপ থার্মাল জেনারেশন করতেই হবে বিকজ আই ক্যানট গেট রিড অফ থার্মাল, যেখানে সোলার আছে আই ক্যান ইউজ সোলার, যেখানে একটু জল পাচ্ছি সেখানে আমি হাইড্রো করব, এবং সেটা রিজিওনাল রিসোর্সের বেসিসে আমাকে স্টেট প্ল্যানিং গুলো করতে হবে। India can integrate large shares of variable renewables by 2030 at no extra system cost. So this is basically, there is a fixed cost, there is a variable cost, এই দুটোকে ধরলে হয় system cost. The model provides a detailed assessment of total system costs, fuel costs and startup costs, investments and fixed O&M costs in generating stations. Total fixed costs are highest in the HRES scenarios. That means high renewable energy sources scenarios, because these have the highest capacities and additional costs in the form of battery storage. However, total variable costs are lower in the HRES scenario because there is lower dispatch in high marginal cost of power. এইটার মধ্যে আমি খুব বেশি কিছু জিজ্ঞেস এক্সপেক্ট করবো না তোমাদের থেকে, আমি শুধু ওই ফার্স্ট পয়েন্টটা, ফুয়েল কস্ট, স্টার্টআপ কস্ট, ইনভেস্টমেন্ট অ্যান্ড ফিক্সড O&M কস্ট ইন জেনারেটিং অ্যাসেটস, এই পয়েন্টটা তোমাদের কাছ থেকে আমি পরে হয়তো জানতে চাইবো যদি আমি ক্লাস টেস্টে এটাকে ইনক্লুড করে দিই। টোটাল সিস্টেম কস্টস আর এসেনশিয়ালি দ্য সেম বিটুইন BCS, that is basic low level renewable energy, and HRES scenarios. BCS scenario পুরোটা একবার দেখিনি, ভুলে গেছি। BCS is basically basic cost scenario, and HRES high renewable and storage scenario because of the substitution fixed and variable costs. So this is, the scenario. This is in fact the scenario what we are doing. This is the scenario of power system operations, what we are planning to do in future with the intent of putting sustainable energy in our system. This is a futuristic approach, that how and which process we will put renewables in the grid so that from the angle of energy, sustainability can be the prime parameter, prime objective. So thank you. And when can I take the class test? Please tell me. গোপাল, তুমি কি আছো ভাই?
ইয়েস স্যার।
ক্লাস টেস্ট কবে নেওয়া যাবে?
স্যার এটা কি আমরা আমাদের গ্রুপে ডিসকাস করে আপনাকে পরে জানাবো?
হ্যাঁ, গ্রুপে ডিসকাস করে আমায় জানাও।
ওকে।
আর তোমাদের ক্লাস টেস্টটা তো অনলাইনই হবে।
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
তাহলে তো আর কোনো চিন্তা নেই, সবাই তো ফুল মার্কস পাবে।
স্যার ক্লাস টেস্টের সিলেবাসটা
যতদূর পড়িয়েছি।
স্যার বলছি
কি বলছো?
বলছি আইএনডিসি পিপিটিটা পাঠাননি, ওটা যেটা একদিন করিয়েছিলেন।
আইএনডিসি
হুম।
তার পিপিটি পাঠাইনি আমি।
না স্যার, ওটা নেই।
আমি চেক করে নেবো।
ঠিক
আমি
আছে।
ধ্রুব চেক করে নেবো। হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
ঠিক আছে।
আর
আজকে হলো
স্যার যদি কিছু
আজকে হলো 21 তারিখ। আমার ইচ্ছে এই মাসের মধ্যে ক্লাস টেস্টটা নিয়ে নি। তাহলে যদি আমরা ধরো আজকে হচ্ছে কি বার, আজকে ফ্রাইডে, হ্যাঁ, if we can take the class test on Tuesday or something, Tuesday or Wednesday, তোমরা একটু ঠিক করে নাও কবে নেবে। অঙ্কিতা?
স্যার ওয়েডনেসডে আমাদের ডিপার্টমেন্টে অলরেডি একটা সিটি আছে তো।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তোমরা বাই নেক্সট বাই 30th একটা ডেট আমাকে বলে দাও, নিজেরা ডিসকাস করে তাহলেই হবে। আমার হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে জানিয়ে দেবে।
ওকে স্যার, জানিয়ে দেবো এটা। আর
ঠিক
স্যার
আছে।
কিছু প্রিভিয়াস ইয়ার কোয়েশ্চেন যদি পাওয়া যেত।
যা কোয়েশ্চেন পাবে দেখবে সব পারছো উত্তর দিতে।
সব স্যার?
সব পারবে, কোনো টেনশন নিও না।
না আসলে অনেকটাই থিওরিটিক্যাল পার্ট আছে তো।
অঙ্কিতা, দুটো অঙ্ক দিয়েছি, ওই ধরনের অঙ্ক আসবে। আর একটা হচ্ছে যে আমি না, এটা তো ওপেন ইলেকটিভ, I am trying to give a concept of the subject, right? If you have the concept, you can answer. You try to understand what is resource efficiency. You try to understand what is basic pollution, what is basic water pollution, what is basic air pollution. I am not going into details of the pollution machines, যেটা আমি পরে আর একটু পড়িয়ে দেবো। এই পরে তো ক্লাস নেব, সুতরাং এত চাপ নেওয়ার কিছু নেই। ওকে, বাই।